despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. Surely he has borne our sorrows and carried our griefs, yet we esteemed him smitten, stricken by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Many of the times when we think of Jesus as the man of sorrows or the suffering servant, one thing comes to our mind, and that is the cross, and rightfully so. But there is so much more to Jesus being the man of sorrows than just him dying on the cross for our sin. It began when he left heaven, the place that we as Christians strive to spend eternity in. He left that place to come and redeem the people that had turned their backs on him. At about the age of 30, Jesus would begin his public ministry, only to be rejected by his family, his friends, his countrymen, to be rejected by the people he came to save. You fast forward about 3 more years, and we see Jesus in the garden, praying to his Father because he knows what soon is going to come upon him. He knows that soon one of the men that he had invested the last 3 years of his life training to take his place is going to betray him, and the rest are going to abandon him out of fear. He would be given an unfair trial. He would be beaten. He would be scourged. He would be mocked. He would be exposed to the public. And yes, he would be given a criminal's death. All of these things Jesus did. But what I want you to understand is that Jesus knew that this would happen to him. It wasn't that he came to the earth and we messed things up. He knew that he was coming and he was going to die for you and me. And he knew this, and yet he did it anyway. He wasn't ashamed to come and suffer and die for us. It's that realization that would lead Paul to write in Romans 1, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Paul realized what Jesus had done for him and what the gospel had the power to do for others. The same Paul would write in 2 Corinthians 11, around verse 25, how that he had been beaten and stoned and shipwrecked and mocked, and all of these horrible things had happened to him. All this persecution had taken place, and yet still he would write, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. You see, Paul understood what Jesus had given up for him. And so he was willing to not be ashamed of Jesus. He was willing to give it all for Jesus. But it wasn't just Paul. I mean, the guys that have gotten up before me have presented men that were not ashamed of God and Jesus. Men like Peter, men like Paul, Noah, Daniel. Many of these men would lay down their lives because they were not ashamed to die for the truth. And you say, well, Landon, that's amazing, and I'm so glad that Jesus did that for me. I'm so glad that that took place, but what does that have to do with me? Let's get a little practical. Romans 1:16, I am not ashamed. I want you to put in your name. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you ashamed? What are you willing to give up for Jesus? You know, we may not have to lay down our lives in the 21st century United States. That probably will never happen. We will probably never be beaten or scourged or anything like that. But what are you willing to give for Jesus? Are you willing to lay down a friendship? Are you willing to lay down your sports team? Are you willing to lay down that hobby that you've enjoyed literally your whole life? What are you willing to give for Jesus? As I start wrapping up, I'm going to leave you with the question, And this is not something I want you to just take and be like, that's a good question. It is something I really do want you to answer. Jesus came to this earth, leaving heaven to come and redeem you. Jesus wasn't ashamed to give it all for you. It was personal. Are you ashamed of Jesus? If not, what are you willing to give? Are we willing to give it all? I hope so. Because there is no reward for giving it all. Paul would write in 2 Timothy 4, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me at that day. Not to me only, but to all those that love his appearing. There is a reward for not being ashamed, and it is a crown of righteousness, and it is worth it. And so I want you to think about that today. What would you give for Jesus?